They said I was too poor, too dirty, too slow. They laughed at the way I talked, mocked the way I looked, and swore I'd never belong in a boxing ring. To them, I was just another street kid, born to lose before I ever had a chance to fight. But what they didn't know was that behind every insult I was sharpening a weapon they couldn't see. And when the time came, I didn't just fight back. I rewrote the story. Stay until the end, because this isn't just a fight. It's karma written in blood and glory. I was born in a place where people said dreams don't survive. The streets of Brooklyn weren't paved with gold. They were cracked with broken glass, sirens in the distance, and voices that told me I would never make it out. They called me dirty, poor, too slow. To them, I was just another statistic, another kid doomed to fail before I even had a chance to fight. But here's the truth. Sometimes the very things that are used to break you become the fire that builds you. Every insult became fuel. Every laugh in my face became another push-up, another mile, another punch against the heavy bag. They didn't know that behind the silence of a broken kid, a storm was forming. This story is not just about boxing. It's about what happens when the world decides you don't belong, and you decide to fight back anyway. It's about karma, the kind that doesn't need revenge in the moment because time itself delivers justice. It's about resilience, discipline, and proving that strength isn't always about the body. It's about the mind and the heart. By the end of this video, you'll see how a boy everyone dismissed became a man the entire world feared. You'll see how being poor, being mocked, being underestimated can turn into the ultimate weapon. And most importantly, you'll learn that no matter where you come from, no matter how many voices tell you that you're not good enough, there's always a way to flip the script. Because the truth is, the quiet ones, the broken ones, the forgotten ones, we are the ones who rise when nobody expects it. And when we rise, the world can't ignore us. So lean in, because this isn't just a boxing story. This is about survival, about karma, about the justice that comes when the kid everyone laughed at finally steps into the light and forces the world to applaud. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story like this. Smash that, like if you believe in second chances, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, your city and country. I want to know where this family of fighters is tuning in from, all across the world. Now, let's step into the ring. I grew up in a place most people only hear about in whispers. Brownsville, Brooklyn. To outsiders, it was just another dot on the map of New York. To me, it was a war zone disguised as a neighborhood. The air reeked of smoke and fried food from corner stores, sidewalks cracked like scars, streetlights flickering as if even the city gave up on us. Gunshots at night weren't rare. They were background noise. Sirens howled like lullabies. For most kids, home means safety. For me, home was survival. People didn't look at me and see potential. They looked at me and saw a future criminal, another headline waiting to happen. My clothes were secondhand, my teeth crooked, and my voice, high-pitched, unusual, was a magnet for mockery. "You sound like a girl," they sneered. "You'll never be nothing." Kids laughed, teachers rolled their eyes, cops smirked when they cuffed me. In Brownsville, words weren't just insults. They were branding irons. They marked you, told you where you belonged, the bottom. I didn't have friends. I had predators. Older kids picked fights for sport, testing their toughness on the weakest target they could find. And that was me. I remember walking home one afternoon, a group of boys circling me. "What you looking at, Squeaky?" one of them barked. Before I could answer, his fist cracked across my cheek. The others laughed as I stumbled into the gutter, dirt in my mouth, blood on my shirt. That laughter cut deeper than the punch. It told me I wasn't just unwanted, I was entertainment. Teachers didn't care. I sat in the back of classrooms, ignored, invisible, until I made noise. And when I did, they called me a troublemaker. One teacher once said it out loud. "Kids like you don't make it past 18. The whole class heard. I wanted to sink into the floor. but part of me burned. If the world already wrote my ending, maybe I had nothing left to lose. By the time I was 10, I'd been arrested more times than most men twice my age. Theft, fighting, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It didn't matter. The system didn't care about reasons. Brownsville wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a pipeline, from the cradle to the cell, from the corner to the coffin, and everyone said I was next in line. But here's what nobody understood. In the middle of all that darkness, I was watching, learning. Every insult, every punch, every arrest was teaching me something. I learned what pain felt like, how humiliation burned, and how much I hated the sound of laughter at my expense. Slowly, that hatred began to take shape, not as destruction, but as fuel. Every time someone said I was nothing, I whispered to myself, "One day, you'll see." Still, I didn't know where to put that fire. I was just a boy, angry at everyone, ready to explode. The streets didn't forgive weakness, and in Brownsville I was weak. My thin frame, my strange voice, my desperate hunger, it all made me easy prey. And every time I walked down those cracked sidewalks, I knew someone was waiting to test me, to humiliate me again. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, clutching a pillow so no one would hear. My mother did her best, but the weight of poverty crushed her too. The refrigerator was often empty. The walls were thin, and hope felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. But even in those moments, I swore something deep inside. I wouldn't let them be right. I couldn't die in Brownsville. I couldn't let my story end in a cell or a grave. One night, after being jumped and left with a swollen eye, I stood in front of a cracked mirror. I didn't see a kid anymore. I saw a caged animal, pacing, ready to fight back. I didn't know how or when, but I knew this. I wouldn't let the world laugh forever. What I didn't realize was that karma had already started writing the first page of my redemption. Somewhere beyond those broken streets, gloves were waiting for my fists. They thought I was just another broken kid in a broken neighborhood, but they didn't see the fire building inside me. Every insult was gasoline. Every beating was a spark. And sooner or later, something was going to ignite. And when it did, the world would remember the boy they once called too poor, too dirty, too slow. You could say my first ring wasn't made of ropes, it was made of sidewalks. The streets were my training ground, and every corner was another round I had to survive. In Brownsville, you didn't need a referee, you just needed the will to walk away breathing. But what I didn't know yet was that these street fights were preparing me for a destiny far bigger than broken jaws and bloody noses. By the time I was 11, I wasn't fighting for glory. I was fighting for respect, scraps of food, and the right not to be laughed at. Every day after school, it felt like someone was waiting. Kids older, bigger, stronger. They'd shove me into walls, rip open my pockets, steal whatever coins I had. And if I fought back, that's when the real beating began. But slowly, something shifted. I stopped running. I stopped begging. I started swinging. My fists weren't polished. They weren't trained. They were wild, desperate, angry. And to my own surprise, sometimes they landed. I remember one night outside the corner store, a kid twice my size shoved me down and said, "Stay down, weakling." Instead, I stood up. I spit blood, raised my fists, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear flicker in someone else's eyes. Those moments mattered, not because I won every fight. I didn't. I lost more than I won, but every swing taught me something. That pain was temporary, that humiliation could be fuel, and that if I hit hard enough, even the laughter stopped for a second. The cops didn't see it that way. To them, I was just another criminal in training. Every arrest felt like a stamp on my forehead. Hopeless. They'd throw me in the back of the squad car laughing, "See you next week, Tyson," as if my future was already carved in stone. But here's the truth. The streets weren't destroying me. They were forging me. Every insult was a hammer. Every fight was fire. I was being shaped, even if nobody could see it yet. One night I found myself surrounded again, 3 boys pushing me against a wall. My heart pounded like a drum, fear clawing at my chest. But this time something inside me snapped. I swung with everything I had, fists flying like they were born to. When it was over, I was bloody, but they were the ones limping away. For the first time, I realized I wasn't prey anymore. What I didn't know was that my fists, born in the chaos of Brownsville, were about to find a home where chaos had rules: the boxing gym. Still, survival came with scars. Nights sleeping hungry, days avoiding the cops, fights that left me limping for weeks. My mother cried when she saw my swollen face, but I told her, "Don't worry, Ma, they can't break me." Inside, though, I wondered if I was lying to myself. I carried a chip on my shoulder bigger than my body. The world treated me like garbage, so I became what they expected: hard, angry, unbreakable on the outside. But deep down, I was still just a boy searching for someone, anyone, to believe in me. And then, the streets led me to a place I never expected. An old rundown gym where the air smelled like sweat and leather, and the sound of gloves smacking heavy bags echoed like thunder. I didn't know it yet, but stepping through those doors would change everything. The streets had given me fists. The gym was about to give me purpose. Because once I put on those gloves, the world would finally learn. What they called weakness was about to become unstoppable power. I didn't know it at the time, but walking into that old gym was like walking into destiny. The place looked broken down, paint peeling from the walls, bags patched up with duct tape, the smell of sweat so heavy it stuck to your skin. But to me, it felt like a cathedral. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to survive. I was fighting for something bigger. At first, nobody cared who I was, just another street kid with busted up sneakers and fists that didn't know where to land. But when I hit that heavy bag, the sound made heads turn. Boom, 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 raw, unpolished power. And in the corner, an old man was watching. Cus D'Amato. He wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. Most adults looked at me and saw trouble. Cus looked at me and saw a weapon. His eyes were sharp, but not cruel. He studied me like he could already see the man I was supposed to become. "Kid," he said the first time he spoke to me, "you're not just strong, you're special. But strength without discipline is nothing." I didn't know how to respond. Nobody had ever called me special before. People called me dirty, poor, slow, but never special. Cus took me under his wing. And it wasn't just about boxing. He drilled into me the psychology of fighting, the art of breaking an opponent before the first punch landed. He said, "Boxing is a war of the mind. If you control fear, you control everything." Training with him was torture and salvation at the same time. He'd wake me before dawn, make me shadow box until sweat drenched my shirt, force me to repeat the same move 1,000 times. I thought he was breaking me. In reality, he was rebuilding me. There were nights I wanted to quit, nights I thought, maybe they were right about me. But then Cus would look me dead in the eye and say, "You will be champion of the world. That's not a question. It's a fact, and you better start believing it." I didn't believe him then, but the world would. Under Cus, I learned more than footwork and jabs. I learned patience, discipline, control. For a kid who grew up in chaos, that was revolutionary. Every time I laced up gloves, it felt like I was putting chains on the rage inside me, directing it, shaping it. But Cus was more than a trainer. He was the father I never had. He didn't just feed me combinations, he fed me belief. He told me stories about old champions, about destiny, about how the world underestimates quiet boys until the bell rings. Still, part of me doubted. I was just a kid from Brownsville. How could I be world champion? But Cus never wavered. It doesn't matter where you came from. What matters is where you're going, and you're going to the top. Training wasn't just physical, it was mental warfare. Cus made me stare into mirrors until I could say out loud, "I am the best, I am unstoppable." At first it felt ridiculous, but repetition carved belief. Slowly, I began to see myself the way he saw me. One morning after weeks of brutal training, Cus brought me into the ring for sparring. My opponent was older, taller, stronger. The first punch he threw rattled my jaw. My instinct was to quit. But Cus shouted from the corner, "Fear is the greatest liar. Control it." Something clicked. I moved, slipped, countered. My fist started landing like thunder. By the time it was over, the older boy leaned against the ropes, breathless. I had won. And for the first time in my life, I felt like maybe I could be more than the kid they mocked. But even victories can carry shadows, and I didn't know how much I'd need Cuss before the end. Cuss became my everything, my mentor, my guide, my protector, and I clung to his words like a lifeline. He told me the world would try to break me again, harder than ever. That fame and money wouldn't save me. They'd test me. Discipline, he said, is doing what you hate like you love it. Those words stayed with me, but the clock was ticking. Cuss was old, his health fading. I didn't want to see it, didn't want to admit that the man who gave me purpose wouldn't always be there. And deep down, I was terrified. What would happen to me without him? The truth is, Cuss wasn't just teaching me how to fight opponents in the ring. He was preparing me for the greatest fight of all, the fight against myself. Because one day Cuss's voice would go silent, and I'd be left alone with the chaos he had barely contained. Stepping into the ring for the first time as a professional fighter was nothing like the streets. The canvas smelled of sweat and resin, the lights burned hot, and the crowd's roar felt like thunder shaking my bones. But the truth? I wasn't nervous. Compared to Brownsville, this was heaven. In the ring, at least there were rules. In the ring, fear didn't stalk me. It served me. From the opening bell, my fist did the talking. Years of anger, humiliation, and hunger came out in every punch. Opponents fell fast. Seconds, not minutes. Reporters started writing about the kid with dynamite in his gloves. They didn't know my name yet, but they knew my power. And once the world learned my name, nothing would ever be the same again. They called me Mike Tyson, but soon, another name was born. Iron Mike. Not because of the muscles on my arms, but because nothing broke me. I was forged in fire long before I put on gloves. Every time I stepped into the ring, I wasn't just fighting another man. I was fighting every kid who laughed at me, every cop who cuffed me, every teacher who said I'd never make it. The knockouts came one after another. First round, second round. Men twice my age, men with more experience, men who thought I was just hype. None of them lasted. I didn't just win fights, I devoured them. The look in their eyes right before I connected? That was the real victory. Because in that moment, they felt the same fear I carried my whole life. The boxing world took notice. Cameras flashed, promoters lined up. Suddenly, the kid from Brownsville, who had nothing now, had everything. Fame, money, respect. But the hunger inside me never slowed. Each fight felt like another chance to scream to the world, I am not weak, I am not slow, I am not dirty. I am a champion in the making. But here's the truth nobody saw. I wasn't just fighting opponents, I was chasing ghosts. Cuss's words rang in my head. You will be champion of the world. He believed it so strongly that I had no choice but to believe too. Every knockout wasn't just for me, it was for him. The night I fought for the heavyweight title, the world was watching. I was just 20 years old, the youngest ever to stand under those lights with history on the line. My opponent was taller, older, stronger, or so they said. But when the bell rang, it didn't matter. Within minutes, he was on the canvas, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had hit him. And just like that, I became the heavyweight champion of the world. The boy they said was too poor, too dirty, too slow, was now the most feared fighter on the planet. But what the world gives you with one hand, it can take away with the other. Being champion wasn't just about belts and glory, it came with shadows. Reporters who once ignored me now followed my every step. Fans screamed my name, but some wanted to see me fall just as badly as they once wanted me to rise. With every headline, the pressure grew heavier. And yet, in that moment, I felt unstoppable. I walked into arenas and watched grown men break before the fight even started. They were beaten before the first punch landed, because fear was my greatest weapon. Fear made me untouchable. Fear turned Iron Mike into a myth. But behind the myth, I was still the kid from Brownsville, still haunted by the voices that told me I was nothing. And sometimes, when the lights went out and the crowd disappeared, those voices came back. Fame didn't silence them. It made them louder. I didn't realize it then, but every rise carries the seed of a fall. The same fire that makes you a legend can burn you alive if you're not careful. And soon I would learn that the hardest punches don't come from opponents. They come from life itself. When I became the youngest heavyweight champion of all time, people thought that was the peak. But for me, it was just the beginning. Every fight after that wasn't about proving if I could win. It was about proving how fast I could destroy. Crowds came not to see competition, but carnage. They wanted to witness the myth. Reporters called my fights executions. Commentators said I wasn't fighting opponents. I was erasing them. In less than a minute, men with years of training, men with reputations, men with families watching in the crowd, they fell to the canvas, helpless under the weight of my fists. But the higher you rise, the louder the world whispers about when you'll fall. Breaking records became routine. Fastest knockout, youngest champion, most feared man alive. They said I was rewriting history, but I wasn't thinking about history. I was thinking about survival. Every punch I threw carried the rage of Brownsville, the lessons of cuss, and the hunger of a boy who was told he'd never be anything. My reputation became a weapon before the first bell rang. Fighters stepped into the ring already beaten. I could see it in their eyes. The hesitation, the fear, the knowledge that once the first punch landed, it was over. And it was. Seconds, sometimes. Rarely minutes. The world gasped, the crowd roared, and my legend grew. But with every knockout, the pressure thickened. Fans didn't want competition, they wanted destruction. If a fight lasted longer than a round, people booed. If my opponent managed to land a punch, they called me rusty. No victory was ever enough. And outside the ring, my life was spiraling into the spotlight. Cameras followed me everywhere. Strangers wanted a piece of me. My name, my money, my soul. The same people who once called me trash now called me a god. But their worship wasn't love, it was hunger. They wanted to consume me just like they consumed the men I beat in the ring. Cuss's absence was a ghost in every victory. I heard his voice every time I trained, every time I knocked someone out. But he wasn't there to guide me through the fame, the money, the traps. Discipline was slipping, even as my fists stayed sharp. And I knew. The cracks were forming. What I didn't see then was that my greatest enemy wasn't across the ring. It was standing in my own reflection. Still, the world couldn't look away. Pay-per-view records shattered. Celebrities lined up for front row seats. Kids wore Iron Mike shirts like a badge of fear. The boy mocked for his voice, and his poverty had become an icon of power, a symbol of invincibility. But invincibility is a dangerous illusion. It makes you forget the rules of karma. It makes you believe you're untouchable. And that belief, more than any opponent, is what begins to break you. Behind the cameras and the belts, my demons whispered louder. Nights blurred into chaos. Fame, money, women, enemies disguised as friends. The discipline Cuss drilled into me slipped through my fingers like sand. Yet in the ring, I was still untouchable. And that contradiction kept me blind. Every fight was another record, another headline. Iron Mike destroys another opponent. Fastest knockout in years. The baddest man on the planet. Titles and labels stacked on top of me, and each one added weight. But the truth? The heavier the crown, the closer it gets to breaking your neck. One night, standing over yet another fallen opponent, I looked out at the crowd chanting my name. For a moment I felt empty. Victories that once fed me no longer filled me. The roar that once lifted me began to sound hollow. And in that silence within the noise, I realized power without peace is just another prison. But the machine didn't stop. Promoters pushed. The world demanded. And I kept swinging, record after record, until I wasn't just a fighter, I was a myth. And myths, no matter how untouchable they seem, always bleed when the cracks finally break open. When you're on top of the world, you believe the cheers will never stop. But cheers don't last forever. They sour into whispers, and whispers sharpen into knives. I didn't realize it yet, but the same world that crowned me as champion was already digging my grave. At first it was small, journalists questioning my discipline, trainers whispering that I was distracted, fans who once begged for tickets now grumbling that I wasn't the same fighter. Fame is intoxicating, but it's also a poison. Sweet at first, deadly over time. The money poured in, mansions, cars, parties, crowds chanting my name everywhere I went. But the vultures came with it. Strangers called themselves friends, but they weren't there for me. They were there for what I had. Advisors smiling in my face while stealing behind my back. Women chasing the myth of Iron Mike, not the broken kid still hiding inside. I had fists powerful enough to drop giants, but I didn't have the wisdom to see how many traps were closing around me. Discipline, the one thing cuss drilled into my bones, was slipping. Early mornings at the gym turned into late nights in clubs. Silence turned into chaos. I was still fighting, but outside the ring I was bleeding out. Then came the scandals. The same cameras that once worshipped me now stalked me. Every argument, every reckless mistake, every explosion of rage made headlines. Tyson out of control. The baddest man alive becomes his own worst enemy. Reporters no longer cheered my knockouts. They salivated at my downfall. I wasn't just a fighter anymore. I was a spectacle, a circus, a monster for their amusement. I tried to bury the pain in excess. Jewelry flashing like armor, cars faster than my demons, mansions that echoed with emptiness. None of it filled the void, because you can't buy peace. And the more I tried, the hungrier the emptiness grew. The cops, the same ones who used to smirk when they cuffed me as a kid in Brownsville, got their chance again. Only this time, it wasn't in the shadows of the neighborhood. It was under flashing lights, cameras rolling, the whole world watching. Arrests, courtrooms, mugshots. The prophecy they spoke over me as a boy had come true. The headlines laughed louder than the kids who used to mock my voice. I'll never forget sitting in that courtroom, reporters scribbling notes, flashes blinding my eyes. The judge looked down at me not as a champion but as proof. Proof that no matter how high you climb, they can drag you back down. And in that moment I understood. Karma doesn't just strike your enemies. Sometimes it comes for you. The truth was simple. I had become my own opponent. The same rage that made me feared in the ring consumed me outside it. I was still Iron Mike in front of cameras, but behind closed doors I was a man drowning. Fans didn't love me. They loved the chaos. As long as I knocked men out, I was a god. But the second I showed weakness, they circled like sharks, and I gave them blood. At night, I sat alone in mansions, built on victories that now felt meaningless, surrounded by riches but starving inside. Poverty never left me, it just changed form. Poverty of peace, poverty of love, poverty of myself. But karma wasn't finished. Headlines weren't enough. Whispers weren't enough. It wanted me stripped bare. And it got its wish the day the prison bars slammed shut. The sound of those doors closing was louder than any crowd, heavier than any punch. Steel on steel, final, merciless. For the first time since Brownsville, I felt like the weak boy again. The one mocked, the one beaten, the one forgotten. Fame meant nothing here. Belts meant nothing. Money meant nothing. Behind those walls, I was just another inmate. The nights in that cell were the longest of my life. Concrete floors, flickering lights, voices echoing down the corridors. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every mistake, every betrayal, every scream of the crowd that now felt so far away. I wondered if Cuss would even recognize the man I had become. There were moments I thought I'd never come back, that maybe the world was right, that maybe I was just another statistic, another cautionary tale. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the rage, beneath the shame, beneath the bars, I felt it again. That same fire from Brownsville. That voice whispering, Not yet. This isn't where it ends. Because prison didn't bury me. It sharpened me. And when I walked out, the world would remember that Iron Mike wasn't done fighting. Walking out of prison felt like stepping into another world. The air tasted different, free, yet heavy. People stared, reporters shouted, cameras flashed. But behind every question I could hear the same doubt. Is Iron Mike finished? Can he ever be the same again? They thought prison had buried me, but prison had only sharpened my hunger. My body wasn't the same, but my mind? It was sharper, harder. I'd spent nights in a cell shadow boxing, replaying fights in my head, hearing Cuss's voice echo in the silence. Now, I wanted redemption. Not just to win fights, but to prove to the world and to myself that I was still Iron Mike. The first press conferences after my release were brutal. Journalists didn't see a champion, they saw a scandal. Was it all hype? They asked. Are you washed up? Every microphone shoved in my face felt like a punch. But I learned to let the question sting and then fade. Because I had something stronger than their doubt. I had hunger. Back in the gym, the smell of sweat and leather was like coming home. Every punch against the heavy bag thundered with rage and hope. Trainers tested me, critics watched, fans doubted. But the more they doubted, the more I pushed. Road work before dawn, weights until my muscles screamed, sparring until I collapsed. Pain was nothing new to me. Pain was fuel. And then came the comeback fights. The arenas weren't filled with admiration anymore, they were filled with curiosity. People didn't cheer for me, they watched like vultures, waiting to see if I'd crumble. My opponent that night smirked across the ring, certain the myth was dead. But when the bell rang, the years in prison, the nights in silence, the hunger in my chest, they all exploded in my fists. The knockout was clean, brutal, undeniable. The crowd gasped. The headlines the next morning screamed, "Iron Mike is back." But deep down, I knew it wasn't about being back. It was about survival. I wasn't chasing belts. I was chasing redemption. But redemption isn't given easily. And the higher I climbed again, the harder life swung back at me. Every fight became a war between who I was and who I was trying to be. Some nights I walked out with my hand raised, the crowd chanting my name again. Other nights, I tasted defeat, and each defeat cut deeper, not because I lost, but because it reminded me time was catching up. Still, I refused to quit. People laughed at my return, saying I was chasing ghosts. Maybe I was. But those ghosts had names: Brownsville, prison, shame, failure. And every time I laced up my gloves, I was swinging at all of them. The world saw a man fighting for money. But inside, I was fighting for something no purse could buy: dignity. I wanted to prove that I was more than the monster the headlines painted me to be. I wanted to show that the kid mocked as dirty, poor, and slow could rise again, even after the world tried to bury him. The arenas grew louder with each fight. Some cheered for me, some against me, but everyone watched. Because love me or hate me, I forced people to feel something. And in that, I found power again. But redemption is a strange thing. It doesn't come in one fight. It doesn't come in one night. It comes in pieces. Each punch, each round, each lesson carved out of pain. I began to see that redemption wasn't about proving I was invincible. It was about proving I could rise even when I wasn't. And that's the truth people forget. Anyone can celebrate victory, but only the broken know how to celebrate standing back up. And though the world thought I was chasing one more belt, what I was really chasing was something greater: my own soul. The toughest opponent I ever faced wasn't a heavyweight across the ring. It wasn't a man with gloves or a crowd chanting for my blood. It was the man staring back at me in the mirror. Because what do you do when the greatest fight of your life is against yourself? On paper, I still had everything: money, fame, recognition. But inside, I was unraveling. Every night felt longer than the last. The roar of the crowd would fade. and I'd be left alone with silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any arena. And in that silence, the voices came back. The ones from Brownsville. The ones that called me poor, dirty, slow. No matter how many belts I owned, I couldn't shut them off. I turned to anything that promised escape. Parties that went until sunrise. Bottles that blurred the pain. Pills that numbed the thoughts. For a few hours, it worked. For a few hours, I could pretend I was invincible again. But when the haze lifted, the mirror was still there. And the man staring back at me wasn't Iron Mike. He was Broken Mike. Lost Mike. A man fighting shadows only he could see. The world thought my fights ended when the bell rang. The truth? That's when the real fight began. Nights pacing the floor, demons clawing at my chest, memories of every mistake replaying like a film I couldn't turn off. Fame had given me everything I thought I wanted, but it had stolen the only thing that mattered. Peace. I remember one night after a fight, the crowd still chanting my name hours later in the streets. Inside the hotel room, I sat on the floor with the lights off. The championship belt rested against the wall, glittering in the dark, but I couldn't even look at it. I whispered, "You're still nothing, still the same scared kid." My own voice was my heckler, louder than the cheers outside. The press called me unpredictable, dangerous, unstable. They weren't wrong. I was a storm with no center, destroying everything in my path. Friends, relationships, even myself. People once feared stepping into the ring with me. Now people feared being near me at all. One night, after yet another spiral, I found myself staring into that mirror again. My reflection didn't blink. My fists clenched, not to fight an opponent, but to fight the urge to break down. I whispered to myself, "You're still that kid from Brownsville, aren't you? Still fighting, still lost." And that's when it hit me. The ring had rules, but life doesn't. In the ring, I could control the chaos, slip a punch, throw a jab, counter with precision. But outside, there were no referees, no bell to save me when the round got too long. My addictions didn't stop after 3 minutes. My demons didn't take breaks between rounds. They fought dirty, and they never got tired. I destroyed friendships. I pushed away people who cared. I trusted snakes who smiled in my face while draining me dry. Women left, trainers gave up, even fans turned their backs. And every betrayal left me swinging at ghosts, wasting punches on shadows that never fell. Some nights I wanted to quit altogether, to disappear, to stop fighting. Because what's the point of being the baddest man on the planet if you can't even beat yourself? But deep down, I knew quitting wasn't an option. Brownsville had taught me that much. Every time life knocked me down, I had one choice: get back up. Even if my knees shook, even if my lungs burned, even if the whole world laughed, I had to stand. I started training again, not just my body but my mind. Meditation, reading, conversations with people who saw me as more than a fighter. It wasn't easy. Some days I failed. Some days I fell back into old habits. But little by little, I began to see a path forward. The fans didn't see this fight. They only saw the headlines, the chaos, the drama. But the real battle was inside me, in the quiet moments nobody else witnessed. And in that war, I started to learn something Cuss had tried to teach me long ago. Discipline isn't about beating your opponent. It's about mastering yourself. That lesson hurt more than any punch. Because facing a man in the ring was simple. He was flesh and blood. Facing yourself? That's a fight you never walk away from. Because until I learned to defeat the man in the mirror, every other victory meant nothing. The truth about transformation is this: it doesn't happen in a single moment. There's no bell that rings, no referee that raises your hand and says, "You've changed." Transformation is slow, painful, and filled with setbacks. But for me, it was the only way forward. Because if I didn't transform, I wasn't just going to lose my career. I was going to lose myself. Sir, when I stepped back into the spotlight after years of chaos, people expected the same old Mike. The knockout machine, the wild animal, the unpredictable storm. And in some ways I wanted to give them that. But deep down, I knew the truth. If I kept being the same man, I'd end up dead or forgotten. So I started with the hardest battle, accepting my past. The boy from Brownsville, the champion of the world, the inmate in a cell, the addict staring into the mirror. They were all me. I couldn't run from them anymore. And for the first time, instead of trying to silence those voices, I listened. I remembered Cuss telling me once, "The hero and the coward feel the same thing. It's what they do with it that makes the difference." For years, I'd been running from fear. Now I decided to face it head on. I began to rebuild, training again, but differently. Not just for titles, not just for knockouts. I trained for clarity, for peace. Long runs before sunrise, not to outrun my demons, but to meet them in the cold air and keep going anyway. Meditation became part of my routine. Breathing, slowing down, listening to the silence instead of drowning it out. At first, it was brutal. My mind screamed louder than any opponent ever had. Regrets, mistakes, betrayals. But little by little, I learned that discipline isn't chains, it's freedom. Freedom from the chaos that used to control me. And then I discovered something that shocked me. The ring was no longer my prison. It had become my sanctuary. When I returned to fight, it wasn't about proving I was invincible. It was about proving I was human, and still standing. Some fans cheered, others mocked. But every time I walked through those ropes, I felt a peace I'd never known before. The noise of the crowd didn't matter. The money didn't matter. What mattered was the rhythm of my breath, the focus of my eyes, the stillness inside me before the storm. Outside the ring, I started opening up about my struggles. I told the truth about my mistakes, about my demons, about the fights people didn't see. And something surprising happened. The world didn't laugh. They listened. They related. Because everyone, champion or not, is fighting something inside. The same headlines that once tore me apart now began to write something different. Mike Tyson finds redemption. I wasn't just Iron Mike anymore. I was a man who had fallen, bled, and risen again. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel ashamed of that story. I felt proud. Transformation didn't make me perfect. I still stumbled. I still carried scars. But I finally understood what Cuss had tried to teach me long ago. The fight is never about the other man. It's always about you. And when I realized that, I found freedom. I started using my story to inspire others. Young fighters, kids from neighborhoods like Brownsville, people who felt forgotten. I told them, they'll call you weak. They'll call you nothing. But if you keep standing, if you keep fighting, you'll prove them wrong. And when I saw their eyes light up, I felt something stronger than any championship belt. I felt purpose. Because transformation isn't about who you were. It's about who you choose to become next. Legacy isn't built in one night. It's not just about the belts you win or the records you break. Legacy is what remains after the cheers fade, after the lights go out, after the world forgets your name. And for me, that was the true fight. The fight to leave behind more than fear. Because when the gloves come off, all that's left is the story you've written with your life. For years, people called me the baddest man on the planet. They feared my fists, my rage, my power. But fear fades. What doesn't fade are the lessons carved into people's hearts. Kids from the same broken streets I came from watched me rise, fall, and rise again. They saw that even when the world brands you as nothing, you can still rewrite your story. Reporters wrote about my knockouts, but that was never the whole truth. My legacy wasn't just in the men I dropped, it was in the people I lifted, the ones who looked at me and thought, if he can survive everything, maybe I can too. I began to understand that the story of Iron Mike wasn't about perfection, it was about imperfection, about scars, about showing the world that strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from rising every time you do. Over time, the crowds changed. They no longer came just to see destruction. They came to hear the lessons behind the destruction. I spoke in schools, in gyms, in prisons. And when I looked into those faces, I didn't see strangers. I saw myself. The scared boy from Brownsville. The inmate staring at prison walls. The fighter chasing redemption. Cuss once told me, "A hero is someone who is willing to give his strength to others so they may stand on their own." Back then, I didn't understand. Now, I do. My fists built my name, but my story built my legacy. And that's when I realized my true fight had never been for titles. It had been for time. Because time is the one opponent none of us can beat. The speed slows, the power fades, the body weakens. But if you use your time right, your story outlives you. And that's what I wanted. Not to be remembered as the youngest champion or the most feared knockout artist, but as proof that even the most broken can rise again. Today, when people ask me what my proudest victory is, I don't say the belts. I don't say the knockouts, I say survival. I say standing here, alive after everything. That is my greatest win. The world still debates who the greatest fighter of all time is. Some say Ali, some say me, some name others. But the truth? That debate doesn't matter. What matters is the impact you leave. And my impact wasn't just in the ring. It was in showing the world that a boy mocked as poor, dirty, and slow could rise to become a symbol of resilience. I know some people will always remember the scandals, the falls, the mistakes, and that's okay. Because legacy isn't about erasing the dark chapters. It's about showing that even in the darkest chapters, the story isn't over. I'll never forget the day I walked into a small gym years later. Kids were training, sweat dripping from their brows, gloves too big for their hands. One boy looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "That's Mike Tyson." In that moment, I realized my presence wasn't about fear anymore. It was about hope. That boy didn't see a monster or a headline. He saw possibility. And when he asked me for advice, I didn't tell him how to throw a left hook. I told him, "Don't ever let anyone tell you who you are. You write that story yourself." Because in the end, my legacy isn't just Iron Mike. It's every fighter, every dreamer, every underdog who refuses to stay down. And that's the story I leave behind. Not of invincibility, not of perfection, but of survival, of transformation, of a man who fought not just others but himself, and lived to tell the tale. At the end of the day, this story isn't just about Mike Tyson. It's about every one of us who has ever been doubted, judged, or broken. Life will try to bury you under failure, shame, and pain. But remember this, true strength is not about never falling. It's about rising every single time you do. That is the real legacy of Iron. So if this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe to Beyond the Game, hit the like button, and let your voice be heard in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, your city, your country, because these stories connect us all. And never forget, sometimes the fight isn't about becoming a champion of the world. It's about becoming the champion of your own life.